Today, we are covering three critical developments unfolding in real time as the United States wages war against Iran. First, Washington is considering lifting sanctions on Iranian oil to keep global energy prices from spiraling out of control. Second, the Pentagon is requesting $200 billion from Congress to sustain the ongoing military campaign. And third, European nations and Japan have issued a joint declaration expressing willingness to help secure the Strait of Hormuz as the energy crisis deepens by the hour. Let us start with what may be the most extraordinary economic decision this war has produced so far. On Thursday, March 19, 2026, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told Fox Business that the White House is evaluating whether to lift sanctions on Iranian oil that is currently sitting on tankers at sea. Think about that for a moment. The United States is at war with Iran, and it is now openly discussing whether to free up Iranian oil exports to prevent its own economy from imploding under the weight of skyrocketing energy prices. The price of Brent crude, the global benchmark, has surged more than 10% in just 24 hours and now sits at around $111 per barrel, nearly 60% above pre-war levels. That is not a market fluctuation. That is a crisis signal. Bessent put it plainly. The administration is looking at roughly 140 million barrels of Iranian oil currently on the water, enough to cover 10 to 14 days of global supply. His framing was blunt. We would essentially be using Iranian barrels against the Iranians to keep prices low, he said. And here's where the irony hits hardest. Lifting sanctions on Iranian oil was something Tehran had been demanding in diplomatic negotiations last year, when the United States refused. Now, with the bombs falling and oil markets rattled, Washington is considering giving Iran exactly what it wanted in peacetime, not as a concession, but as a wartime survival tool for its own economy. Analysts are already noting the significance of this shift. Nicholas Mulder, a sanctions expert at Cornell University, said the United States now needs to roll back sanctions to offset the secondary effects of the very war it launched. This demonstrates the instability of the situation, he said. The logic Bessent outlined is straightforward. If Iranian oil is allowed to reach the open market, it will flow to buyers in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Japan, and India, rather than being quietly absorbed by China under the table. That would increase global supply, reduce prices, and weaken Iran's leverage over the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil and gas passes every day. Whether this plan materializes in the coming days remains to be seen, but the fact that it is even being discussed reveals just how much pressure the energy crisis is placing on American policymakers. Now, let us turn to the price tag of this war. On Thursday, Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth confirmed that the Department of Defense is seeking approximately $200 billion in new congressional funding to sustain the military campaign against Iran, known as Operation Epic Fury. The first strikes were carried out by American and Israeli forces on February 28, 2026. 19 days in, the White House had already acknowledged a cost of $12 billion as of last Sunday. The jump from $12 billion to a request for $200 billion signals the scale of what the Pentagon is planning. This is not a quick strike campaign. This is a sustained, high-intensity offensive. When asked about the figure during a press conference, Hegseth did not flinch. He said the money would fund the ongoing mission, accelerate the replenishment of weapons systems already used in combat, and rebuild depleted stockpiles for future operations. His answer, when pressed on the cost: "It takes money to kill the bad guys." That line may generate headlines, but the operational picture Hegseth and Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane painted is deeply serious. American forces have now struck more than 7,000 targets across Iran and its military infrastructure. Kane confirmed that 5,000-pound bunker-busting bombs have been dropped on underground Iranian weapons depots containing stockpiles of cruise missiles and drone support equipment. These are weapons designed to penetrate reinforced concrete and rock before detonating inside, collapsing underground facilities from within. And yet, Kane acknowledged on Thursday that Iran still retains some capability to strike American targets and allies in the Middle East. That admission is significant. After nearly 3 weeks of what Hegseth called the largest strike packages in the campaign, delivered on consecutive days, Iran has not been disarmed. It entered this conflict with an enormous arsenal, and it is still capable of striking back. That reality explains why $200 billion is being requested and why Hegseth refused to give any timeline for when the war might end. "It will be a final choice of President Trump," he said, "to allow us to say we achieved what we needed in the name of the American people. No deadline, no exit ramp, just an open-ended military campaign with a 9-figure price tag attached. If you find this kind of deep, unfiltered geopolitical analysis valuable, take a second right now to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. This is where we cover the stories that actually shape the world, without the noise and without the spin. Now let us get back to what is happening on the other side of the Atlantic and in Tokyo. While Washington wages war and scrambles to contain an oil shock of its own making, a coalition of key American allies issued a joint declaration on Thursday that carries enormous diplomatic weight. The leaders of the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Japan signed a statement expressing their readiness to contribute to efforts that would ensure safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran effectively closed the strait since the war began on February 28th, and that closure has sent global energy markets into a tailspin. The International Energy Agency last week authorized the largest coordinated release of strategic oil reserves in its history in an attempt to cushion the blow. The joint declaration is notable for what it says and for what it carefully avoids saying. The 6 nations did not specify what military or naval contribution they are willing to make. They called for an immediate halt to attacks on civilian infrastructure, including oil and gas facilities, and pledged to work with certain producing countries to increase output. The deliberate vagueness around the use of force reflects the deep political constraints each of these governments faces domestically. European publics are not enthusiastic about being drawn into another Middle East conflict, and Japan is constitutionally limited in how it can project military power abroad. That last point is especially relevant given that the declaration came just hours before Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi met with President Trump at the White House. Japan imports 95% of its crude oil from the Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz is not an abstract geopolitical concern for Tokyo. It is an existential economic artery. Trump had been pressing allies to send warships as part of a naval coalition to force the strait open. Takaichi, who has been trying to move Japan away from its post-World War II pacifist constitution, has so far declined to explicitly offer military support for clearing Hormuz. The Prime Minister told Japan's parliament on Monday that Tokyo had received no formal American request, but was examining what actions would be constitutionally permissible. The declaration signed Thursday suggests these nations are moving toward some form of coordinated engagement, even if the details remain undefined. The pressure to act is immense. 1/5 of the world's oil and gas flows through a strait that is now effectively under Iranian threat, and every day that passes without a resolution deepens the economic pain felt from Berlin to Tokyo to Washington. The question is no longer whether these allies will get involved. The question is how far they are willing to go and how quickly they can agree on the terms. What we are watching unfold in real time on March 19, 2026, is a war that began as a military operation and is rapidly becoming a global economic crisis with no clear end date. The United States is considering giving Iran what it refused to give in peacetime just to keep oil prices from breaking its own economy. The Pentagon is asking Congress for $200 billion with no defined exit strategy, and American allies, from London to Tokyo, are inching toward involvement in a conflict they did not start and are deeply uncertain about joining. The decisions being made this week will shape the geopolitical landscape for years. Tell us in the comments. Do you think this war will expand further into a broader regional conflict, or will the economic pressure force a diplomatic off-ramp before that happens?